Thank you. Welcome to this meeting of the Interim Independent Advisory County Assessment Panel on the 2nd of June 2021. I declare the meeting. My name is Lily Walsh and I'm the chair of today's panel. I'll shortly introduce the other panel members, but firstly I have a few minutes to run through. I'd like to start with acknowledgement of country. Wingecarribbee Shire Council acknowledges the Gundungurra and Tharawal people as the traditional custodians of this land we now call Wingecarribbee Shire. I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and I would also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present here today. I'd like to advise that the meeting is being live streamed to the Council website and recorded. There are no apologies. There are no declarations of interest apart from the following. Expert member Scott Barwick in respect of item 5.2, 115, 129 Railway Grade Fund Noon has declared a less than significant non-pecuniary interest as he is the director of a planning consultancy that utilised Scott Lee, the applicant's consultant town planner, for overload planning work approximately 3 years ago. He has no personal or professional relationship with Mr. Lee, and in those circumstances I have determined that he may participate in the implementation of that item. Lewis Overall has declared a less than significant non-pecuniary interest also in item 5.2, as she sits as an expert member on the Wollongong Local Planning Panel, and Scott Lee, the applicant's consultant planner, also sits on that panel as an expert. She has no personal or professional relationship with Mr. Lee, and in no circumstances I determine that she might participate in the determination of that item. The community representative Richard Coffey less than significant non-pecuniary as he has known one of the objectors, Harvey Green, as a journalist some 15 years ago, and sees him occasionally on the streets of London. He has no personal or professional relationship with Mr. Brennan, and in those circumstances I determined that he may participate in the determination of that item. The procedure for the meeting will be that all the business paper received the council officers and carried out some inspections earlier today after item 6.1 planning proposal. The panel has a determinative role in respect to all development applications on the agenda today, apart from item 5.5, which must be determined by the administrator, as it is a review of a determination made by the full council. So in relation to that item, we will be providing advice only. Similarly, with planning proposal item 6.1, we only have an advisory role. We'll deal with the items in the order in which they appear on the agenda. Emergency speakers, members of the public first, and applicant proponents second. The panel members may have questions and in response to any issue raised from the relevant council officer. Presentations will generally be limited to 3 minutes per speaker, but that may be extended at my discretion. Where there are a number of speakers on one item, it's not necessary for them to repeat what another has said regarding a particular issue. It's sufficient if they state that they support the previous speaker on that issue, if that be the case. Now this next bit is very important. The speaker has spoken and will not be permitted to speak again unless it's in response to a question by the chair or the panel member. When we've heard from all speakers on all items, we'll move into closed session to deliberate, and we'll return to the public meeting to announce our decisions, and that will be live streamed. The minutes of the meeting will be placed on the council website within 2 business days. I'd just like to introduce the panel members for today's panel meeting. We have 3 independent experts, including myself, and 1 community member. I'm a solicitor with over 35 years experience in local government planning and environmental law, and I'm currently the chair or alternative chair of 3 local planning panels in the Sydney metropolitan area, having held those positions for the last 3 years. I'll now ask the other panel members to briefly introduce themselves, and if I could start with Scott Barwick, and then go to Lewis Ozog, and then go to Mr. Colley.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Scott Barwick. I'm a consultant planner, 30 odd years of experience, and I also, in addition to this panel, sit on the planning panel in the Sydney metropolitan region as an expert.
Good afternoon. My name is Lewis Ozog. I'm a consultant town planner. But my experience is largely in local government, so mainly working with councils in development assessment. I've got over 20 years experience, currently contracting to Georges River Council and also the Department of Planning, and I do sit on some other planning panels, mainly Wollongong and Cumberland Council as well. Mr. Colley.
Richard Colley, resident of Windsor Carriby Shire Council. My local government background, I was the General Manager of Bankstown City Council for 10 years. I was also the Chair of the Local Government State Grants Commission for 8 years. I was Administrator at Wollongong and Administrator at the recently merged Canterbury Bankstown Councils.
Okay, so there are no speakers for item 5.1. In relation to 5.2, we have 2 members of the public speaking against the development and 2 representatives of the applicant speaking in favour of the development. So I'll start with Mr. Jeffrey Knapp, if you could come forward.
I think it's Peter Knapp, and I'm speaking on this.
Oh, okay. Sorry, what's your name?
Robin Mamuni.
Oh, Robin Mamuni. Okay, just come forward. Just if you could just fit this chair here. Oh, so you're speaking also on behalf of Peter Knapp?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So you're in fact the only
Right.
speaking.
Okay.
Okay, well I'll give you 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. Might need 3.5.
So you lodged a written submission?
Peter did. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. So, as we've just established, I'm Robin Mamuni, and I'm speaking against aspects of this proposal. I wish to raise 3 main issues. An alternative proposal to support the needs of a mixed-age Bundanon residents would better serve the community and create a streetscape in keeping with Railway Avenue currently, the street on which the proposed development occurs. Secondly, trees are being removed and not replaced, and the proposal significantly reduces the natural environment. And thirdly, I urge Council, the committee, to enable the pathway connection from Sky Place at the rear of this site, as proposed in earlier subdivisions of the Brigadoon Drive area. Bundanoon's a very small town, as many of you would know, of 2,500 plus residents, and has a village atmosphere. Large developments, such as the proposed 21 dwellings, with mostly multiple occupants, can easily upset Bundanoon's character. Already, Bundanoon accommodates a significantly large seniors population, and I reference the census, which shows it has a median age of 56 compared with the national of 38, I think. 30 plus additional seniors in one development, potentially requiring transport, cleaning and food services for everyday needs, and medical, garden, maintenance, etc. services, is a significant addition to the community. Council needs to consider the support it must provide or enable to make such a proposal viable before granting approval. We are all aware that the statement in the application isn't true. Home care packages are not readily available. Otherwise, if this doesn't occur, this proposal becomes just a plan to overdevelop and overbuild and destroy Bundanoon's character. A development for a mixed age population, including younger people of working age, close to the town centre, could be part of the solution. For example, why not 7 or 8 units for seniors, plus 2 or 3 700 to 800 square metre sites at the front? That should be possible on this particular site. This would maintain the typical Railway Avenue streetscape as an additional advantage. Changes to the proposal could lessen the significant alteration being proposed to the natural environment, apart from the one I've just said. The application does not provide replacement trees for the 28 being removed, and I would say some other really significant mature trees that have already gone. Hedges, low shrubs and ground cover that are proposed are not replacements for mature trees and the habitat that provides. The proposal is seeking a significant increase in the built environment. The proposal requires more buildings, more paths, more roads, and more parking areas over the current approved plan. All of these clearly establish the natural environment isn't the main issue. I note that large numbers of cars may need to drive around the site. It's a proposed one-way site around, so potentially 2 cars for each of the 14 main dwellings, plus the 7 studio occupants, plus their visitors, and all the support services. That's a lot of traffic. One pathway not in the current vision is a connection from the rear to Sky Place. There is an existing well-maintained path from the Sky Place circuit to the rear of this proposed development, but it lacks a connection through to Railway Avenue. Bundanoon has quite a shortage of paths, actually, forcing people to do most of their walking on the roadways. So I urge the committee and the council to consider making this a reality. And that's it. Thank you. Yep.
All right, and now I do have an overview that there's a late edition. Jeffrey Allen wishes to speak against the development. Yeah, if you could come forward. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Did you lodge your written submission?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
Okay. My name is Jeffrey Allen. I own an adjoining property to the rear of the proposed DA with my next door neighbour. Our back fence takes the full width of the proposed development. Car parking. The current DA describes an 11-bay car parking bay at the rear of the property adjacent to the fence adjoining our property. This is going to generate a lot of noise from vehicles coming and leaving the property, doors slamming, etc. As the road has previously been mentioned in the DA as a gravel road with a minimal buffer zone to us, as well as traffic traversing around the suggested one-way system, which I don't think that is needed, we feel this is going to impact very severely on our lifestyle. We do not understand the need for 11 car spaces when each dwelling has a space in front of their garage for a visitor. Therefore, we request that the car park be removed from the rear of the property to the vacant land in front of the main dwelling along the road to connect with both driveways, alleviating the need for a road across the rear of the property, thus cutting out any pollution of dust and noise that would affect us and adjoining neighbours. Garbage bins. According to the DA, there will also be 10 garbage bins, some of which will be adjacent to our rear patio. Drainage. The natural watercourse for the adjoining properties on the southwestern corner of the proposed development rely on the natural fall of the land. Any increase in ground levels changed, i.e. earthworks from building or driveways, will interrupt the natural flow of the stormwater, adding to the already lake that appears every time that we have torrential downpour. This water accumulates from the rear of the properties in Rosenthal, Sky Place and Council's own pathway that goes nowhere and floods our property. Overcrowding of the development as submitted. The current DA shows 14 semi-attached dwellings for seniors housing with a ground GFA varying from 135 square metres to 156 square metres. That includes a garage with very little garden area for each unit. We do not feel that seniors housing in Bundanoon is seriously we do feel that seniors housing in Bundanoon is seriously lacking and would welcome any proposal for suitable seniors housing in keeping with the Bundanoon area. We feel that these buildings are not conducive to a comfortable lifestyle for older persons. To have 21 small self-contained dwellings on the available land within the development is too crowded. This is the third DA for this property and has gone from a subdivision with 6 dwellings and the existing house to the current DA. And we feel that in its current form that this DA is not in the best interest of local residents or the future occupants and request that it be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you. Just wait there. I'll see if you have any questions. Oh, yeah, can I just clarify, you the property next to the pathway?
Yes.
Okay, so you're that. Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I have Scott Lee and Brett Marvin. Who would like to go first?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Brent is not here.
Okay. All right.
So
I'll
I may.
5 minutes.
Thanks very much. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm the planner involved in the project and the author of the Statement of Environmental Effects. As I've just said, I'm speaking on behalf of the owner and the applicant, MDA Architects, this afternoon. So it goes without saying that we do not support the recommendation for refusal. In fact, that recommendation came as a bit of a surprise to us, and as a result, we're requesting that the matter be deferred rather than determined today. I have raised that, or our concerns with council management and that request, and as I understand, they do not raise an objection to the deferral request, but that can be clarified. In brief, although the DA was with council for 7
Sorry,
months...
Sorry, just interrupt you. Just assume that we may not defer it.
Oh, that's okay. Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. In brief, although the DA was with council for 7 months, the applicant has not had the opportunity to engage with the assessing officer in any meaningful way. We don't believe the process has been fair, and we note that the reasons for refusal are not based on issues of non-compliance. We strongly believe that the report is not balanced, and if meaningful discussion was had with us during the process, the recommendation quite possibly, if not probably, would have been different. Notwithstanding the request for a deferral, I have been asked by MDA Architects to make the following points to the panel. They were initially asked to purchase the property by the Bundanon Heritage Group to avoid it being demolished after it was advertised as a land subdivision opportunity by the previous owners, Youth Hostels Australia. We successfully restored, this is MDA Architects, successfully restored the old pill factory in Bundanon, a heritage listed property rather. We were advised that the Youth Hostels Australia were selling because of the outstanding works required on the home, 1 million plus in estimate of repairs required, which were uneconomic based on the income from the existing tourist accommodation business that had been running there for some time. The house has been subsequently used for short-term rentals in the Airbnb style, not uncommon in the area, but found that the same problems arise, and based on cash flows, that's not a sustainable long-term option for the property if any of the work that's necessary to the house is to be done. That includes critical repairs, replacement to roofs, walls, foundations, services, electrical. Basically, the building is in dire need of a makeover. We secured an approval for a 7-lot subdivision, later amended to an 8-lot subdivision, 7 smaller lots, 1 larger residue lot suitable for the setting, to maintain the setting of what we would call the historic dwelling. The intention of the DA before the panel today, however, is to build on that approved development pattern to provide housing that is badly needed in Bundanon. We can redeploy capital from the sales of the new dwellings to the renovation of the building as aged housing, working in tandem with the new surrounding villas. Move the tourist accommodation use to a lower impact use, studio type apartments for seniors within the historic home. Without the approval, neither of these uses, this is not likely to occur. It's more likely that the blocks will be sold off for individual development and keep the existing house on the larger residue lot and continue to use it for as long as possible for some sort of tourist accommodation as it's being done now. During the assessment process, We contacted the assessment officer numerous times for asking if there was concerns or we could meet to discuss. However, that wasn't possible. And now we're faced with a refusal, hence our request for a deferral. We believe the process was poor. The result of a refusal will also be a poor outcome for the community, which in general terms wants retention of the historic house, which we can provide, a change of use of that house away from the tourist accommodation use, and in a general sense, Bundanoon community does welcome and accepts the need for more seniors housing. We welcomed Council's suggestion some time ago to heritage list the property. However, now through the refusal of this scheme, by default, Council will be encouraging potentially just a simple mix of project homes, possibly 1 and 2 stories, on the approved allotments. That's not...
Sorry, can I just... Is anyone recording the meeting?
No, what happened was I hit on something and
Okay,
it all came live, so I'm not recording.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry. So that form of development on the lots that have already been approved, we don't believe is the best outcome. We believe a deferral is a fair outcome from this afternoon's meeting to allow us to address the issues raised in the report. Happy to answer some questions.
Okay, so I might just go first. I was particularly concerned when I got to the site today about the accessibility of the occupants of the site, who many of whom will be quite elderly, the ability for them to access the bus stop and the frequency of services into, because it's obviously going to be too far for many of the occupants who would be expected to live in this development to walk to the shops. So I just wondered if you could address that.
Yeah, well, there is a bus stop there. It's one of the main routes from Bundanoon into Mossvale. It runs reasonably regularly. That's been covered in the statement. So I think it's a compliant accessible. It's compliant with the policy in relation to access to a public transport node. You're correct to point out that it's not a well-developed or constructed footpath area or bus stop area. But that's one of the issues that could have quite easily been discussed with the applicant and on behalf of the applicant. We're not adverse to looking at what is reasonable to improve accessibility to that extent, but we haven't been given the chance to talk about that. The bus stop is there. It provides a suitable transport opportunity both back into Bundanoon and back out to the centre of Mossvale. And if upgrades are required to the bus stop, that is something that is quite within the realms of the discussion with the council as a reasonable condition. That's the way it needs to be. But we weren't allowed the opportunity to discuss that.
And when people go into Bundanoon, if they're coming back on the bus, does that stop on the other side of the road? Or?
It stops on both sides, one going out and then when it comes back in.
Though there was a speed limit of 50k an hour today, the traffic seemed to be, there seemed to be quite a lot of traffic and going quite fast. Do you think that's a suitable situation for elderly people to be crossing at that?
Well, again, if there is a need to improve the crossing or the safety of, that's something that can be discussed. The bus stop is there, directly outside of the property.
Okay, that was.
Well, I was just looking, we've only had access to this today. On the landscape plan, it appears to have a 1.2 metre path within the front boundary of the property of Railway Avenue. Is that one of the propositions that you're putting forward in terms of improving the accessibility to that bus stop?
Well, in a general sense, frontage works and footpath works in front of the development site would be, an expectation.
Yeah.
How much further that needs to be extended is probably where you start to discuss it with the council as to what's fair and reasonable. And that's what that, I believe, is indicating on that plan.
I guess the matters that came to mind for us and which came out of the officer's recommendation were obviously practical issues of the accessibility and the amenity that would be afforded by the access to that single bus stop. probably concerns over having vehicles. There's 3 separate dwellings reversing on the Railway Avenue, and again, we're only there for a short time, but it seemed to be there's a relative volume of traffic travelling at a reasonable speed through there, so that sort of raised an issue. But probably the bigger concern is, in our mind, was the amount of development proposed on the site, particularly on the western side. There's minimal, negligible opportunity for any buffer planting. You know, given the character of Bundanon and the Highlands as a whole is more about building in landscape settings, that was something that was certainly raising concern in our mind in terms of how this was fitting in with the character of the area. So I think, are they the types of things that, when you've read the report, that you would be considering responding to, in a broader sense?
Well, quite possibly we can respond to that. I mean, the other comment is that even though the number of dwellings is higher than the number of lots, the overall footprint for the duplexes on each lot is no greater than what a single house could be, in terms of the floor space and certainly in terms of their setbacks to boundaries and that. So the footprints are no different than what can be achieved as single dwellings. It's just making the floor space that's available 2 dwellings rather than 1. The pattern, if you like, has been established through the subdivision approval, which deliberately set out to provide a very large residue lot for the house in the middle with nothing in front of it. So all of that garden and open landscaped area from the Lynbrook to the street is maintained very deliberately. And that will be the case with this development, as it would be with if the subdivision is activated and the lots developed individually. The built form will be, by and large, the same. People will buy an individual lot and construct an individual dwelling of pretty much the same dimensions, on the same setbacks, the same footprints as what you have in front of you now. The opportunity was put forward in this way to provide the opportunity for some alternative housing type and style that is completely aligned with the demographics of the locality and in short supply in Bundanon.
And in terms of the concept that was brought up by, I think, the first speaker, when obviously you're predicating a lot of the application with the dual occupants, or call them dual occupancy, but pairs of seniors dwellings on essentially on the lots created. Would there be an opportunity? There would seem to me then there would be the opportunity to say, well, actually, we won't do all of them, as some of them might just be single dwelling lots instead of all of them.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's something that can be discussed if there is merit in that approach and it provides a better outcome or addresses particularly areas of concern. Well, then, as an applicant, we would be discussing that with council and responding.
Well, last one I'll hold before I let someone else go. You mentioned about the concept is about realising capital from the sale of the dwellings to help fund the upkeep, the restoration of the potential heritage item. I think there's been a resolution of council to pursue that. Has there been an offer to link that to a conservation management plan or something like that, so that offer is secured for the community?
As I said, the owners have never resolved from the position of working with the council to secure a appropriate heritage outcome. It is not a listed property.
No.
It has been. But it's recognised that it's got some value.
Yep.
And that's why the pattern of development that's been secured to date respects that. And the application before you today, however, just takes a slightly different approach to what is possible on the basis of housing that is more attuned to the demographics of the locality. Our view was that that Bundanoon does not need necessarily just another 7 individual allotments of land. What it needs is housing appropriate to its demographic, and that is this sort of approach, and that's why we put it forward. And it does nothing different to the longer-term heritage or impact on the house than what would 7 individual lots. It's better because it secures also the use of the house itself for a residential purpose in the studio apartment approach within the house. It's a very positive scheme in our view, but we're happy to talk to the council about the issues of concern that have been raised, and we would have if given the chance. That's again, I just say that's why we think a deferral today would be a fairer outcome. The only better outcome would be if the panel decided to approve it.
So how, just looking at the underlying subdivision consent.
Yes.
So it was a 2016 approval. I was wondering.
That much long ago. I'm not sure. Sorry, I don't have it in front.
7 years anyway, hasn't it?
It would have now. Yes, that's right. The original approval, yes, and then it was amended. But the original is, I didn't really. Yeah, time flies.
I've just got a small question about waste disposal bins. Just kind of the arrangement and how does that all go out on the street? Because you've kind of got areas next to the houses, but then also a centralised area, I think. And I just.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure. My recollection is that the individual houses would have their own bins in the garden and just take them to the street. I mean, it has a very wide street frontage, the lot or the property as a whole, so it can accommodate that on the street. But it is also possible that there'd be a different or an arrangement, different arrangement for a collective, garbage storage or garbage collection contract of some sort. But I would have thought this scale for the houses that proposed individual bins would just simply be the way to go. But certainly, again, if that's a concern or an issue, or there's a better way, a preferred way of doing it, that's something that can be discussed. Not a closed book on that question.
Okay. So you've never had an opportunity to, sit down with council?
No, that's the point I made, and the essence or the basis of our request for a deferral is that it would have been appropriate, I feel, for at some stage during the process to have had the opportunity to discuss the range of concerns that have obviously come out in the assessment report. Naturally, we were quite confident in the application that we put forward. So a refusal was a surprise. But anyway, it's by the by now. If we have a chance to converse with the council and talk about those issues, I'm sure that there's resolution to everything in there.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have one more question. The studio apartment proposal, so it's on GO3200. You have that?
I don't have it in front of me. That's within the house?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was just interested, you've got 2 communal lounges.
Did you get the chance to go into the building today or just the outside?
No, we had a look from the outside.
Yeah, okay.
So you've got 2 communal lounges and a communal kitchen, and I just wondered whether you think that's really likely to be used in a development like this, which is essentially self-contained dwellings?
Good question. I don't know. I mean, it struck me as a good use of the building and a good opportunity. Whether it's used, the applicant's vision, right, was to create a small community where there was that opportunity for sharing of experiences and spaces, and because I think by and large, that's probably very healthy for everybody, rather than being cooped up in their own space. To the extent that people use it, I mean, you might choose to use it much more than I might choose to use it. But I think it's a worthwhile proposition to be putting, and certainly a good use of the building as it's already configured, because because of its current use, it has these spaces available. So that's why it's been put forward like that. Personally, I think it's worth putting forward in the hope that people use it, because it seems like a good idea. But,
and then the last thing is, there was a concern in the report about the solar access to these units. What's your assessment of the solar access to these studio apartments?
Well, my impression has always been that they complied with the minimum amount of solar access. It's been designed, it's architecturally designed, and then by the applicant. So it's you know, all of those things were considered in the design. And I would be surprised if it doesn't comply. The report seems to question that, but again, we haven't been involved in a discussion about that with the council officers, so we understand fully where the concern lies.
So when you say complies, what would you say? What?
Well, we'd have a minimum. It would have minimum.
So would that be 2 hours solar access in your time that they would
into the open space and the living areas? Yeah, that's certainly our impression. We didn't put this forward in the belief that we had areas of non-compliance at all. Okay.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to just go back to bus stop and the service. Are you aware of the current bus schedule and its relevance to seniors?
Well, I don't use it. The information that we put forward in the statement was based on what was available from Berrima Bus Lines as to what the route is and how frequent it is. Now, if that's changed, I'm not aware. Well, I can't really comment as to how relevant it is to a senior citizen who lives in Bundanoon, because that's not me. What we said was that in terms of what the level of expectation or access to a public transport node was, we have a bus stop here. It's serviced by one of the main routes of Berrima Bus Lines that go here. So that takes people to those areas, and that's what we put forward. Whether residents of Bundanoon who are aged think that that's not good enough, I can't comment.
I'll just let you know that there's, I think, 5 services. One is at 7:10, which I don't think suits seniors. The next 2 of them are for school. Leaves very little.
I'm not disputing the facts from somebody who might know the way that service operates better than I do. But my understanding is it is compliant with what is necessary by the state policy or council's controls for access to public transport if you are proposing a seniors development.
So no other questions? Okay. And you said Mr. Marvin.
Mr. Marvin, on behalf of MDA Architects, is not here this afternoon, but he has authorised me to speak on his behalf, and that is what I've done.
Okay. Well, we will make a decision.
Yes.
And
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next item and the last item is 5.5. Section 8 review of DA 19.65 for an eco-tourist facility at 198 Fox Grove Road, Canyon. So I have Mr. David McKinley to address the panel against the development. Thank you, Mr. McKinley. Did you go through written objection?
Yes, yeah. It was on behalf of the residents, an objection submitted, yes.
Yeah, we have that.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity this afternoon to represent a group of residents on Fox Grove Road who obviously submitted on numerous occasions to council sort of information to oppose the development. The group are not opposed to the concept of an eco-tourism development in the Southern Highlands, but I think it's important that that development, if there is one that goes forward, it's assessed properly and fully against the requirements, particularly for ecotourism facilities. The information provided in the original application and the assessment process raised a number of concerns for the group, and we've represented to Council on a number of occasions and obviously provided more detailed response to Council previously. The major issue that we're concerned with as a group is the future activity on the site, and that use has not really been effectively assessed as part of the application. The use has some impacts directly on the site, but also in terms of access through the unserved road that connects to the site. The deficiencies, and we probably don't have enough time to sort of go through those today, but they really sort of fundamentally affect how the site will operate and be used. The concerns primarily around traffic and the number of visitors. There's a real conflict, and I think it was really good that obviously with the independent review, it's highlighted that issue, that there's not sufficient information in the management plan, the draft management plan, on how the site will be operating. But there's information to allude to how it might operate, and there's talk of quite significant cultural activities and day visitors and so on. None of that information has really been assessed as part of the application. The majority of the information that's been used in terms of determining water usage and traffic counts and so on is about the people that might stay there, and as the most recent traffic report has suggested, mainly weekends. So it's looking at the 48 sort of weekend sort of places. But in reality, that's only maybe a marginal part of where the future site may be working. And without the information inside the management plan, we can't really make a future evaluation as to how that site will operate, what the impact on the traffic is, and impact on water usage and so on the site. It's also of a concern to the residents that I guess the internal referral process, when this is submitted through Council's officers, the engineers and so on, is that a lot of the information that's been used in the report that was presented and to Council from the officers, the conditions of consent, for example, don't reflect what you'd expect as being sort of engineering solutions. Majority of the conditions of consent reflected suggestions by the applicant in terms of how he might mitigate things like dust suppression, speed control and so on the road. And if you've had a chance to see the road, it's clearly a small road. It's not adequate in terms of the current use, let alone if you start to increase the traffic movements through that site. And so the recommendations that we made to Council were that if you do approve the application, that the conditions of consent should be more in line with Austroad's sort of expectations of roads of that sort of size and nature, which would involve widening it to at least a 6.3 metre carriageway and applying some appropriate seals on the road to actually suppress dust. And then along with that, proper speed signage, which would actually control the signs. The reason for that is because it creates a scenario for Council that you've got protection of environment, protection of the community, public safety, but also have some conditions that are enforceable. Because a lot of the conditions that are draft conditions in the report, they're not really enforceable by Council. It's hard to enforce things enough in the public sector without sort of having vague statements in there, which clearly don't help Council in terms of its role to protect community environment from risks and hazards. So they're the main sort of points. Obviously, the group that I represent are very encouraged by the independent review. It supports most of or all of the concerns that have been raised, and supports obviously the decision to refuse the application. So that's pretty much all I have to say today.
So I misunderstood. I thought you're actually a town planner representing them.
No, I'm not a town planner. No, but I'm just representing them. Yes, yeah, that's right.
Just wait there and see.
I just wanted to just clarify concern about the water usage on the site.
Yes.
Just to unpack what is that in terms of wastewater generation, or
it's about the capacity. The assessment that was done by Sydney Water. It was largely done on the basis of the people that would be staying overnight on the accommodation. So again, we fall into this sort of vague space of not knowing how many people might be on the site at any one time. In the management plan, it talks about school visitors and coachloads of children. Well, that's quite a lot of people on the site. But the capacity for the septic tank and so on is largely driven by the 18 people who would be in cabins and 30 people that would be camping. And when you look through the detail, there's no provision in there, for example, for people camping to actually have a shower. Their water usage is only for toilet flushing and so on. So again, I think that to think about the site purely as 48 people on the weekend, it's probably not from an ecotourism facility, probably a large enough sort of scope in terms of its size, potential size. Okay. Thank you.
And our last speaker for today is Mr. Frank Malley. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak to the panel today. I'd like to cover 3 areas within my allotted time: the brief history of Moreton Park, the development application itself, and the contamination issue, and then I'll conclude. So Moreton Park has a long history. Back in 1972, consent was granted by council for amenities block, cookhouse and tourism for up to 43 students and 3 teachers. And I've got a gipper here with all the history of the consents, and I've also got a significant amount of information I've got from previous people that have stayed on the property, maps, documents, photos, tourist maps, etc., showing activity on the property right up until 2009. Now, with specifically to the development application, whilst preparing the original development application and during its assessment, my consultants were in regular contact with the assessing officer at council. There were several requests for additional information from the council planner, and we complied with every single one. It now appears, from reading the assessment of the application for review prepared by the new consulting planner, that the principal issue is the absence of detail in the management plan. I draw your attention to the assessment. I draw your attention to additional information dated the 16th of August 2009 from the previous council planner assessing the application, Senior Town Planner Peter Malloy, and that's his email sent to my consultant Darren Hogan. And on page 3, and I quote, this is what he requested of us: the submission of a conceptual management strategy to address clause 5.13 requirements is required to be submitted and subsequently considered in the S4.15 assessment of the development application. Should the development consent be granted, a condition requiring submission of a full management strategy is considered likely. In adherence to this request from council as Mr. Malloy, I prepared the conceptual management plan myself with the understanding that I would be required to engage a suitably qualified expert to prepare a full and detailed management plan should the deferred commencement be issued. Based on this concept management plan and other submitted documents, the council planner and council's environment division recommended approval of the application in its current form on both occasions that this application went before councillors. I was aware that a fully detailed management plan would be required to be prepared by a suitably qualified expert, but that would be imposed as a condition of consent. If at the time council advised me of anything more than a concept management plan was required for the determination, I would have gone to the expense and commissioned such a report. It was entirely reasonable for me to believe that the concept management plan I provided was sufficient for the purpose of council making determination on this application. Had the new consulting planner assessing the application for review requested that detailed management plan be provided, I would have engaged a suitably qualified consultant to prepare this. Now to address one other issue, the contamination issue. Lastly, I'd like to address this. This issue has been completely addressed, and I'll go into why it's been completely addressed. First of all, if you're aware, there was a preliminary site investigation done by ClearSafe, and ClearSafe in one of their letters, page 2, and I quote, "A very limited visual inspection of soils within the mounds of the motocross track did not observe any anthropogenic material within 3 test pits evacuated in 3 locations on the northern, eastern, western areas of the track." So we had actually dug in to mounds to look at the structure of the mounds, and every single mound was consistent to just natural soils. So they've seen that. That was the preliminary, and the assessment was that it had low risk of contamination anywhere on the property. Even so, I was asked to do a detailed site inspection, which I did, which I paid for quite extensive, of the 130 soil samples, not just on the motocross track, but the entire property, based on the locations that ClearSafe said to take samples of, came back 0, no contamination. So from a scientific independent lab assessing soil samples, there was 0 contamination in any sample, okay? So, and then finally, I was trying to get council to come to the property, and finally, Nicholas Wilton and the then acting general manager, Barry Paul, visited Moreton Park. And at that visit, they walked the entire track. They took over 20 minutes. And by the way, of all the councillors and council people, they probably spent the most time at my property, that 20 minutes. And they saw nothing either. There's no bricks, there's no tiles, there's no asbestos coming out of the ground, there's no plastics, it's just not there, it doesn't exist. So that's the contamination, and I'm happy to discuss that more. Now, to conclude, Moreton Park has a history of tourism. This development application builds on that. We don't require any clearing of land or any new structures. We're going to utilise existing structures. Our original DA submission satisfied all the requirements, and specifically I was only asked to supply a conceptual management plan, which I did, and council was satisfied with that, with the stipulation that a detailed management plan would likely be required if a deferred commencement was granted. If the new consulting planner had requested a full management plan, I would have engaged that. Also, the contamination is no longer an issue, it's been resolved, and again I quote from the original document submitted from the General Manager Corporate Strategy and Development in the section Discussion of Key Issues, page 32, and I just quote a section of it. Council's Environmental Health Officer raises no objections to the proposed development in terms of contamination and has provided conditions of consent, including conditions addressing asbestos register, asbestos management plan, removal, clearance certificate, etc., etc., etc. So even the Environmental Health Officer had no objections. So to end, I respectfully request one of 2 things, I hope. First of all, I think my application can be approved based on the original DA assessment and the requirements of me in a deferred commencement. It's quite detailed. If not, the second option would be just to defer your determination, because I believe the overview I've given is a reasonable overview. It's an overview. I understand it's not a detailed one, but if I was given the opportunity to write a detailed one, you would get all the details. Because if my submission is only going to be rejected because of those details, that's all I was asked to give. I've never been asked to give these details. So hopefully, I believe that this document would then satisfactorily address matters pertaining to clause 5.13 of the LEP, including development, would be in the public interest for the protection of the natural environment and its delivery of environmental education awareness programs. And I'll be happy to take any questions from the panel. Thank you.
So we went out to the site, met your horses.
Okay.
So the cabins, were they the subject of the council approval?
It's a bit murky. I contacted the original owners. They're still alive.
So when did you buy the land?
2012.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So those cabins were built in early 1970, about 74.
So they were there when you bought it?
Yes. Yeah. I refurbished them. So that I've got here's old photos of the cabins. This is 1979, and there are the cabins with people, and there's the amenities block in the background. It was all developed back then. I haven't done anything, really. I've refurbished, yes, but I haven't built new structures. Now, I was told by the original owners, who are still alive, they said to me, they've submitted all the applications for the cookhouse, the amenities, and the actual consent for running a tourist. And that's all here. I've got it all here. I've got all the letters going backwards and forwards. And I asked him about the cabins, and he said at the time he was specifically told, this is what he told me, and I can only listen to what he says to me, that because the cabins were built on slider rails and they were mobile and you could move them, he was given advice from council that he wouldn't need to submit plans and get approval for those. Considering he went to such an extent for the amenities, the septic, the cookhouse, the business itself, I find it bizarre to think that he wouldn't have submitted plans if he needed to for such small basic structures. It just didn't make sense to me that that's what he would have done and risked his development. So that's all I can tell you. At the moment, I have not found any records in council's documents about those cabins. I've seen them on surveyors' plans, so council knew of them back in 1979, 1980. I think there's a couple of other ones where the surveyor has actually said, yeah, there's 12 cabins. They're here. They're on the site.
Okay,
Because you mentioned that the report's got BA building application from 1972,
Yeah.
or two BAs from 1972, the amenities block and the cookhouse and storeroom. In your records, the consent for the education and accommodation.
Yeah.
Reference to that.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. It's a big document. Okay, so there was a bit of toing and froing between council and the development, or the two brothers that did it. Where is it? Here. So what had happened was the council sent a letter saying they deferred, they wanted more information. The two brothers came back, and then on the 10th of April 1972, there's a reference to permission to construct, and also for the building and the construction for buildings used for 2 and 3 day school tours to be operated on the first and third terms of school, general sightseeing, education purposes, etc. And the resolution is resolved on the motion of councillors GDC Larson and WJ Missing that development consent be approved for the erection of amenities, and it's being cut off here from the GIPA. They just photocopy things sometimes.
That was 2 and 3 day school tours on what was the
first and third terms of school. There's a whole document here from the travel company. Here, there's a whole document from, what are they called? Yeah, I think so, something like that. So here's Telford's educational tours. Okay, so they had a whole itinerary of tours in Canberra, Thredbo, Snowies, Hunter, Genolan Caves, and one of them was Moreton Park in this area in the Southern Highlands, and they had options of 1, 2 and 3 day tours. So that was the consent that was granted then.
So 10th of April 1972.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that was a resolution of council.
Correct.
Yes, I just had to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So have you got a copy of the report?
I do.
Thank you. So on page 144,
Here.
the council report says it refers to three different building approvals. You see those? Is that halfway down the page?
Is this number 4 proposal?
This is page 144.
Yeah, I've got one.
It says, just above those pictures, it
On the
says
page before proposal.
Stage 144.
Yeah, 144 in the council report. Have you got the council report?
Yeah. There you go. Oh yeah, this one here. Oh, mine's 143
Oh, okay.
for some reason.
Okay, so there's reference to 3 building approval numbers there.
Yeah.
So the document that you just referred to, was that one of those or was that another approval?
I don't know.
Do you have an approval number? Oh, okay, I'm just wondering, it's just, yeah. I was just wondering whether you yeah. Okay.
I could try to find it
Oh, no, I just
for
thought you
you.
might have it handy, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
There's a minute number of 660/72. 60 slash, looks like a 72 to me.
Which would be 1972.
Yeah, okay. All right. And I had another question. The dwelling house, you live in the dwelling house? Do you live in
The home?
Yes,
I do. Yeah.
And what wastewater arrangements does that have? There's obviously the wastewater arrangements that you've got there.
Yeah.
The amenities block. Does the houses wastewater and sewage go into that? Or
No. No, I've got a multi-chamber eco septic system, which has multiple chambers, and pretty much the water that comes out is good enough for irrigation.
But
completely separate. Completely separate. Yeah.
Just wanted to ask one question.
Yes.
You were talking about the management plan.
Yes.
So did you do any more work to that management plan to lodge with this review? Or did you just, with this review, did you put the same management plan in as you had with the DA?
Yes.
The original DA?
Okay, so when this process started, I didn't have any concept of what this meant at all. And when I found out that there was a consultant involved, I just said, have you got everything? Do you need me to resubmit? Do you need me to do anything more? I asked all these questions. I think I did it 3 times, and I didn't get a response. So everything that's in the current review is identical, except for one thing I did do was, which he didn't ask me for, because I knew it was a bit of a contentious issue with, and I'd love to sit down with my neighbours and talk about it. I'm open to discussing, right? The issue of traffic management, I engaged another consultant and spent more money for him to write. So that document is extra, but the management plan, no. If I was asked by the consultant, I would have done it, 100%.
No, I understand. I suppose where I'm getting at is that council, despite the deferred commencement recommendation for deferred commencement, council did refuse the application on a number of grounds. One of which was a lack of detail and justification for meeting the recognised standards of an ecotourism facility. And I suppose I'd say if you're doing a review of that recommendation, it seems to me that you probably need to provide more information and further justification to try to resolve those, reasons for refusal, because there are council had a different, obviously, opinion and provided that with those reasons. So just putting in the same information, I don't know if that really addresses council's reasons for refusal, and that's maybe how also the report is structured, that there's information that's lacking and it's not clear on a lot of points. So that's all. I just wanted to know how much further work have you done in terms of that management?
Yeah, like I said, I asked whether, and I've never done this before. I'm not a developer. I'm just live at my place and want to do something very simple, right? And I did the review, and I asked questions because I didn't know. I asked questions, and I could have easily have had a response, and I could have easily. Plus, the eco component of it, there was a lot. I believe there was a lot of conflict there, because there was, in one hand, they're saying I need Ecotourism Australia certification, and I'm going, well, no, not really. That's just something that I would do off my own bat, and I will do it. I will do it, you know. And the management plan, I was given clear direction from council that an overview was needed, and I didn't think that direction changed, and that included the details for the eco, and also the 11 odd things that I need to comply with to be classified from council's perspective. They agreed that I comply. That's why they recommended approval. I think a lot of the subjectiveness of whether it is or isn't was in the councillors' meeting, okay? Not so much the staff. The staff said, hey, everything's fine, couple of things deferred, do these things, clean up the bit of asbestos, whatever, you know, get fine, and we'll be fine. And I didn't think that changed. That's why I didn't do any work.
Just one, Mr. McKinley, one sentence in his presentation said there was no shower facilities for campers. Is that correct, or?
Oh no, I think what he said was in the water assessment. So when they say people that camp use a certain amount of water, what David said was that they weren't considering campers having showers. They can have showers. I've got showers. No, but I would challenge that statement myself, because the water analysis, the litres per person per day was defined as a typical camping user and a typical person staying in a cabin, and they were different. And these are ISO standards that we use, not me personally, but the water person that did this work. He said, okay, if you're a camping person, we allocate this amount of water per day. If you're staying in a cabin, we allocate this amount of water per day. It had nothing to do with me. That's the standard that they use. But we have showers. We've got 3 showers for females and 3 showers for males, and there'll be an extra disabled toilet and shower. I'm not sure if you remember, there was this walk-through passage. That's the only structure, really, that I'd have to build, is the disabled shower and toilet, and alter the green cabin so that there's a ramp for a disabled access and make the door a bit bigger so that they can get in. But apart from that, nothing. Zero.
I do have one last question.
Okay.
About the wastewater treatment and
Yes.
the assumptions that your experts
Yes.
made. So was the assumption made for that system that there would never be more than 48 persons on the site at any one time?
Yes. So this is again why I find there's a little bit of confusion. I'm allowed to have 48 people. That's it. If I've got 40 people overnight, I can only have 8 people turn up during the day, if that's what happens. The rules are it's 48 people. It's not 48 people staying overnight and another 48 people that come and go during the day. It's 48 people. So he's sized the new septic system, which I'd have to decommission the old one.
Yeah, I actually read the report.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So is there some proposal for day trippers as well as people staying overnight? So you've got cabins, people stay overnight in cabins, people stay overnight in the campground.
Yeah.
Is there any proposal for people to come during the day as well?
I've not written anything about day trippers at all, okay? My concept is people come there for 1, 2, 3 days, whatever it may be. It's more that experience of being in the bush, going for the bushwalks. If it's a group of school children, again, it's only a total of 48. It can't be 50, it can't be 60. And if it is 48, it's probably in 1 or 2, like a minibus or something. So it's actually less vehicles than more.
So if it was a group of school children, would they be staying overnight or would they be just coming to visit during
No,
the day?
staying overnight.
Stay overnight.
Yeah. All my plans are for people to stay there overnight, because then that's why I wrote about introducing some educational aspects like the Aboriginal culture. I'm not proposing that we're going to be some centre of Aboriginal cultural excellence. There are other people that do that. But I think for kids to come and get a taste for it from someone that comes there, that we pre-book. So if there's a group of school children, they sit around the fire, we play some instruments and didgeridoos and what have you, and they get a feel for it and they learn, that's great. I think the kids actually would go away with a better appreciation. So it's always been staying overnight. It's never been the just turn up for a day trip. It's just, I haven't even thought of that, to be honest with you.
Okay, no, right, well, that was our last, you're our last speaker, that's
Okay.
the last item on public meetings. So I'm going to close the public meeting now at 4:45 p.m. and we'll reopen the public meeting to make our determinations and announce them. But that will be at least an hour, so I think we'll do this. Just have it for last. Thank you to the speakers and thank you for your assistance.